Hello, everyone. I'm JT Keating, Vice President of Marketing for Zimperium. I'd like to welcome you to another webinar. We're having a lot of fun doing these webinars. We're having a great time having them be nice and interactive and enjoying hitting some of these topics. And this particular one is very timely in terms of everything going on, and we're going to have some great discussions about it. And it's all about how do we protect the Chromebooks that are being used by folks in the cities, states, and in particular, the primary focus is going to be on education, and that'll be very clear why in a little bit. The usual perfunctory stuff, we're going to try and keep it to about 30, 35 minutes of content and Q&A. If there is no Q&A, we don't make it up. We don't believe in that. We will give you a little bit of time back at the back end. There will be an archive version of this up within a day or so, and if anybody's interested in the slides, we can make those available. Please do, throughout the entire webinar, as we're having these discussions, if you have a question, throw it up in the Q&A section, and then we can be off to the races. So, with all of the standard stuff out of the way, I would like to dive in, and I'm really excited about this one because I'm actually joined by a couple of my compatriots here, and it's going to be a lot of fun because we can actually have a great discussion. We're really trying to make sure that when we have these sessions, it's almost more of a briefing than a webinar. This is not about the Zimperium product. We'll talk product at the very end for like 2 minutes. It's really more about bringing people together to think about issues and discuss them. So joined by a couple folks. First, joined by Karen Jackson, and it's always great to have Karen on here. Karen is the former Secretary of Technology, as you can see, for Virginia. Most importantly right now, though, she is an advocate for cybersecurity in education. So Karen, great to be on another session with you.
Great to be here, thanks.
And we also are joined by my buddy Chul Yim, and Chul has been eat, sleeping, and breathing state, local, and education markets for quite some time, along with healthcare. Chul is hanging out in San Francisco, so we're hoping rolling blackouts don't take him out somewhere in the middle of all this. Chul, great to have you as well.
Yeah, thanks, JT.
So Karen, what I would love to do is, if you don't mind, is just kind of start at the top of this whole thing, right? And that is, we're now people getting back to school, both at the K-12 and the higher ed side of things. You know, some people are trying to do it in school. Some people are doing remote. What, at the highest level, what are you seeing, and do you have any kind of thoughts on how people are going to balance these going forward?
Yeah, that's the big question that everybody's trying to answer right now, is how to do this and how to do education in this world. We've seen a lot of the different universities go in only to come back out and have to be back into a remote setting pretty quickly. I think the interesting thing is I'm currently an interim director at a higher education center in a rural area, Martinsville, Virginia, New College Institute. And for me, it's been really interesting to watch the struggles that people have gone through with trying to go remote and go remote so quickly. It's taxing the infrastructure on the inside. They may not have been completely prepared with an online platform. It's certainly testing it from the infrastructure and the hardware side of the house, because they've got to make sure that every student has a device that they're able to work from when they go home. And that's not always the case. So the topic of, securing the Chromebooks and trying to make sure that our kids are safe online now that they're thrust into this remote environment. Remote learning has not been a popular topic except for those in the military and others, throughout forever in education. And now it's thrust on everybody and we're having to deal with it. And of course, I think probably the last thing that people are thinking about is the security on these devices. The push to get it out, the push and the need to get people back into education is creating, I think, some gaps that we really need to pay attention to. And certainly this is one of them.
Right. No, I completely agree. And, we were just kind of looking at a few things as you were like saying, kind of transitioning. It's like, what do we do? Right. And then the one thing that I think, and I would love your perspective on this, I don't see a scenario where remote education isn't a part of it for this school year at a minimum. You know, we talked about, for instance, you know, North Carolina, you know, went, shut down. Notre Dame went, shut down, you know, and it's unfortunately, from a safety standpoint and everything, I think a lot of these schools, remote education is a reality. Do you agree with that, or do you think I'm kind of overstating it?
No, I think the genie's out of the bottle now.
Mm.
I think, you know, despite all the badness of COVID, I think the fact that we now have remote opportunities for people to learn, especially those in rural areas who may not be able to transport themselves, you know, to a Notre Dame or a UNC, the ability to be online remotely is it's a new benefit, quite frankly. But they really are. I don't think there's any putting the genie back in the bottle. It's out now. People have figured out how to do this. Hybrid, you know, there may be such a time that they could go back in, but I don't see it anytime in the foreseeable future, because those that have tried and failed have failed hard.
Right.
And I think, at least my opinion is, and I know at the higher ed institute where I am, we're still 100% teleworking. And that's in part due to the governor's rules and different things that we have to deal with. But I don't relish bringing students back into the building, and it risks staff, it risks, you know, just credibility in some senses. And so I think remote is going to be the way this goes for quite some time, because people are now witnessing the mistakes and they don't want to be the one to make that same mistake. And so I think we're going to be doing remote at least through beginning of 2021, maybe all the way through the spring, depending on how effectively this, you know, we get this under control.
Right. No, I think I agree with that. And and it's then you kind of sit there and say, okay, so at the highest level, we know we're going to have some kind of a hybrid, but remote learning is definitely going to be a part of it. Then you get into kind of like what this slide is talking about. What does that even mean? And there's, what does it mean from training the teachers? How do you equip the teachers? Because teaching is very, very different in this world. And then there's the, you know, the next part that goes with it as we start heading, you know, down this path, which is the infrastructure required for the kids, right? I mean, there's the curriculum. We're going to talk a little bit more. Obviously, the focus of this conversation is going to be a lot on Chromebooks as a platform. But even before that, there's the whole thing about, do we actually have internet access for all of these students? Are you, you know, what are you seeing in terms of, you know, I've got to believe that regionally and everything that there's big differences, but what are the biggest challenges, do you think, from an infrastructure standpoint, before we even get to the security part? Because if you can't, you know, first we have to get people up and running and learning, then we have to figure out what are the risks. But from an infrastructure standpoint, anything you're seeing, and what are your, you know, compatriots and even folks at states like you used to work in trying to do to solve this problem?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The broadband access is an Achilles heel for all of this. And that's not just in rural areas. I mean, you have affordability issues that transcend where you live. And you also have, you know, the situations at home of, okay, so you've got connectivity, you've got a computer. What do you do with it? You know, you don't have your resident IT person sitting in the next room. You may or may not. And obviously the kids are way more tech savvy than probably their parents are. But that still doesn't, you know, maybe not in the right way, but you know, you've got a very complicated issue when you've got to combine network and platforms that are essential to the school day, but devices home with kids that don't have, a lot of them don't have internet access. And the problem is that, you know, as many Wi-Fi hotspots as people can blast. I know a lot of schools are blasting out free Wi-Fi. That still involves people getting in a car, getting on a bus, getting some sort of transportation to get to a point where they can actually get the connectivity. And in some of the areas, the libraries serve as a major point for that kind of activity, and they've shut down because of COVID.
Right.
So even the backstop to the backstop is not there right now. And so we've got real challenges. I've actually seen, at least when this first started back in the spring, I've actually seen school systems that sent home packets of work because they just weren't prepared to take this leap. And I think that's gotten better because they've had a little bit of time to deal with it. But the broadband access challenge, if we don't figure that out, that is something that creates a digital divide, and a set, especially in this situation, that is going to be irreparable to the education of our kids. And
Yeah,
it's
that's one of the things that I worry a lot about. I know, for instance, there's a district here in Dallas where it's interesting, like basically the equivalent of the booster clubs. They're actually doing fundraising for Wi-Fi access for the folks that don't have it. It's not just in Texas, not just football. It's like, we're going to do fundraising for this now, but that's a very tactical response. And like you said, there could be long-term shifts. And then as we move kind of further down that, right, and we start talking about Chromebooks in particular. And the reality is Chromebooks have become the de facto standard because of cost, because of availability. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different reasons. And so just a couple quick stats, this is all the way back in 2018. It's actually higher than that now, that 60% of the laptops in education were Chromebooks. And then according to Google, 30 million Chromebooks are being used in education today. We also saw in the second quarter, of 2020, that Chromebooks were 25% of network of laptop shipments worldwide, and that's out education and everything. So Chromebooks are very much a part of this path, and so now we know we got these students, we got Chromebooks in there. Jewel, what I would love is, can you talk to us a little bit about the risks? What are the risks that we're facing? And there's incoming risks, stuff that can actually come onto a Chromebook, and then there's outgoing risks. Can you just kind of explain what's there today and what still needs some coverage?
Yeah, thanks, JT. So it's interesting. So when you look at Chromebooks, I'm sure parents, teachers, and administrators were thinking, all right, this is like our laptop at home. However, there's going to be things that they don't want their children to see. So these, inappropriate websites, as well as, what else can they protect them? What else can they protect their students from? And a lot of that is now, around the content filtering, or it's, what can we control on these Chromebooks so that they can focus on learning. And, some of the things that probably have been taken care of now is that area of inappropriate websites and others, and other kind of threats that probably haven't been thought about, but now with the incoming risk coming in, those are going to be the things that we really want to focus on. And that's around, are these Wi-Fi networks safe when you're connecting onto them? Are these apps as well when you're downloading them from the Android Google Play Store? Are these links, are they safe when we're clicking through them? And just, and as well as like, what are these applications, based off of the security and privacy, what are they taking from our students? And so, these are the things that we're wanting to focus on now because there's so many Chromebooks and remote learning happening as the school year is just starting to begin. Yeah,
and I think, to your point, and going directly off of what Karen was talking about just a few minutes ago, I mean, it unfortunately, the folks that for instance, all of these incoming risks, we've focused on the content filtering, and it's a state law, I think, in pretty much every state, that if you provide this out to the students, you need to have content filtering. You need to protect where they're going. It's also, it's kind of what we've seen from all of our customers is parents just kind of trust that if I got something from the school, it's safe. And so there's the content filtering part, but what about all these risks that you were talking about, Chula? And I was thinking specifically about when Karen was saying, for instance, the folks that don't have Wi-Fi in their own home, they have to go cruising around looking for Wi-Fis. And one of the easiest ways to trick any kind of mobile related platform, iOS, Android, Chromebooks as an extension of Android, quite often the device connects itself, it introduces itself to the network, not the other way around. So these students they don't know whether or not they're hooking onto a good network or a bad network. And then in the COVID world, we've seen that huge spike in phishing having to do with COVID and malware having to do with COVID. So I mean, all of these things are out there, and they're what we need to start actually dealing with. And I think that you know, here's some examples, and we're not going to run the videos. This is up on our YouTube channel, but Chul, can you kind of talk through these? And then of course, on the next slide, we even go into what are some of these risks, because fundamentally, we need to, all of this, there's so much stuff that the districts need to solve, and the parents need to solve. It's a matter of what risk am I willing to take, but first I need to know what the risks are. So can you just kind of chat through these a little bit, and then we'll talk through a few more on the next slide.
Yeah, so I felt that these were important. You know, we don't necessarily need to show the video, but it goes through the processes of how, you know, a hacker or just someone who's wanting to gain, you know, access to these Chromebooks, you know, the process, which for, you know, for someone who's wanting to, you know, do harm to a school district, they only need to get one Chromebook that is going to try to connect to the network. And so, you know, for a lot of parents, it's, you know, do you want your Chromebook to have its camera turned on, or do you want the microphone turned on and it's listening on the conversations? As you know, for most of us, we just leave our laptops and mobile devices on 24/7. So it's always, you know, it could always be listening in. And then ultimately, like, the last thing we want is, you know, the user account on that Chromebook, you know, the credentials, the passwords being taken, and then and then that's, you know, just another avenue to get to what they want to get to is all the students' information. And so, you know, these videos are on our website, you know, and I'm sure we'll send a follow-up, but just zimperium.com/industry/education, and you can see these videos in person. But it was just overall the risks that are happening every day that, you know, that just don't have visibility until it's too late.
Yeah, it's interesting, you know, and this probably be a good time to talk a little bit about the threat actors, right? You know, so everybody, you know, we always talk about hackers, and we always talk about, you know, and for enterprise customers, for our government customers, there's a term of art called an APT. That's an advanced persistent threat. An APT is not a piece of software. An APT is an actor. It is like nation states. They are advanced, they're persistent, and they are in fact a threat. And so for nation states, for instance, you have to worry about other nation states as an APT. When you come down here, a lot of people might be kind of saying, well, it's a student's, you know, laptop, who cares, right? You know, I mean, who's going to be attacking them? Simple fact is, depending on who that attacker is, these Chromebooks are really dulcet. They're really tasty for those folks to dive into, and they can change. It could be a predator. It could be another student, right? And so and when we think about those actors, you know, Joel, I think that's when we start looking at this and we're like, okay, it's funny. There's not funny. There's really three different people involved with this. There's the district, there's a student, and then there's the parents, right? And it's kind of like, how can these things be impacted? So Joel, can you, in light of, you know, the fact that we're not really talking probably about some nation state trying to target a child to find out about their homework. What sort of things could happen, ranging from putting cameras on to cyberbullying? I mean, the impacts of these things, not just the technology of, hey, it can happen.
Yeah. So, with just rogue access points, bad Wi-Fi networks, and, gaining access, I think ultimately all these attacks are wanting to exploit the device. It's where you gain the most control over the data and the use of the Chromebook. And, as we've seen the data, even from FBI and other sources, ransomware is a growing trend. It's also a real concern because, if you can't access your information or the district's information, and learning can't proceed, that's a huge opportunity cost for we're already struggling in terms of how we're going to educate our children. We want to make sure that these Chromebooks and just online learning continue to happen. And, these threat vectors, whether it's Wi-Fi or phishing, or just really bad apps, or, and our students are smart. They'll find ways around, if there's a system around content filtering, they'll find ways to potentially jailbreak their phones or their Chromebooks to get access to the things they want to be able to talk with their friends. That Chromebook may be the only medium for them to socially engage. So, there's just a lot of interesting risks happening right now that, that definitely needs visibility and protection.
Yeah, I think the visibility part is huge. Karen, I'd be interested in your take on this. I mean, Jewel is, coming from the perspective, obviously we solve these problems, so we're spending a lot of time with it. But from your kind of macro view, whether it's the stuff you're doing with the center, or just kind of from your advocacy thing across the board, what are your thoughts about some of this stuff? What are your thoughts about some of the risks and things along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I it's what you don't know that can harm you the most. And I think that's the situation with all these devices that are going home with students right now. In the rush, and I say in the rush, there's been a little bit more time and we've had a little bit more space to do the rollout in a more organized fashion. But I think if I was a parent, and the school division gave me a Chromebook for my child, probably the last thing I would wonder about would be whether or not it's secure. I would just make that assumption. And so I think from a parental standpoint, most parents are not IT geeks, they're not CISOs, they're not chief information security officers. And so it really becomes incumbent on, the parents to ask the question of the school divisions. And, we also have parents who homeschool, that are engaged in remote learning as well. And so I think it becomes kind of a little bit of a different way of looking at this, is in that, the parents need to be asking the school systems, how are they protecting their child and how are they protecting these devices? And in the crush of everything else that parents are having to deal with, that's probably not a top of mind question, but it should be. And so I think that's there's a lot of bad things that can happen. And I did chuckle to myself when you were talking about, the damage that one phishing email can cause. I've seen that. And it's much more than you think is possible if you can gain control of one laptop. And so the magnitude of the threat, the fact that I think parents are taking a lot for granted about how secure these laptops are and what the school divisions are doing to actually secure them, are things that really, they need a lot of attention, and they need it sooner rather than later. I mean, I know this isn't a plug for Zimperium, but I have it on my phone. And I have to tell you that, it's a comfort knowing that somebody else is looking out for my device, because I'm not going on and looking at each individual wireless network that my phone sniffs, or, and it's nice just to have an added layer of protection that I don't have to worry about. So, I mean, I think that turnkeyness of that security is something that the school division should be paying, you know, specific attention to, because it's not nascent in the DNA of parents to be security experts.
Yeah, you know, it's a great point, Karen. And actually, to you know, kind of even put a little bit more of a point on that, we did another session for the federal government last week, and it was on MDMs versus mobile threat management and mobile threat defense. We were talking about different parts. One of the main themes that we've seen across the board is heading towards parity. Parity on what we're used to on traditional laptops, for instance, and what we should expect on a Chromebook, or what we should expect in iOS or Android devices. Nobody has a laptop today, a traditional laptop, that doesn't have any virus on it. You know, everybody does. Why? Well, because there's threats. You know, well, there are threats on other platforms as well. And the fact is, all of these things we're talking about here in terms of the threats, there's nothing inherently less secure about a Chromebook that makes it the target of these. These are the same things that iOS devices face, same things that Android devices face. And frankly, you know, when you look at a lot of them, they're the same ones that are on Windows devices. They're just different variations of a theme. So if you have a new platform and you have the same threats, then you have to figure out, what am I going to do to protect myself from it? So Joel, can you, speaking of not just us and speaking of the federal government, just chat a little bit about this one point here, and then we're going to look to wrap up.
Yeah. So, you know, the interesting thing about, you know, the threats is that, you know, I'm thankful that there are organizations like DHS, the FBI, and others that are, you know, looking for these nation threat actors, as well as just, you know, trying to figure out how to protect, you know, our population, and just, you know, the amount of devices that are connected. But, you know, one of the things that hits home with this alert is just, you know, there's this huge opportunity. You know, laptops, desktops, you know, were the first, and then, you know, mobile devices are now starting to trend in terms of threats being targeted there. And now you have Chromebooks, and just K through 12, because the infrastructure that K through 12 has, you know, always been focused on productivity and functionality. And so you want to get these devices in, you know, in the hands of their students, and you want them to, you know, be able to learn without any impediments. But now, you know, the bad guys have seen this as well, and it's notices like this from the FBI that really show that the threat has become more real, and we're trying to help, you know, as Imperium's trying to help get in front of that now. You know, we know that with some of our vendor partners, these Chromebooks are delayed. Some of them, schools won't get their largest portions of Chromebooks until, you know, in the fall time or even early winter. And so, you know, that's why we're doing this now, is like, now is the time before those Chromebooks get into the hands of students. Let's get the proper technology, security technology on there, you know, so that there is visibility, there's a management, you know, on these devices for the security teams to take action when a threat occurs.
Yeah, Joel, I think you're exactly right. Matter of fact, one of our participants in the session had sent a note exactly along the lines of what you're talking about in the Q&A capability, pointing out that there are no Chromebooks available until December. And then there's a whole dovetail of things that kind of follow out from that, that he articulated as well. And the other point on this, and you and I have discussed this a little bit, you know, over the last few years, we have seen examples of Android malware, which Chromebooks are susceptible to, that actually one of the first things they do when they get on a new Wi-Fi network is they will actually scan for any Windows-based devices that are susceptible to the WannaCry ransomware. So they're being used as a delivery vehicle to potentially deliver WannaCry. So you take that model And in the enterprise world, you might be like, okay, but what are the odds that an Android phone is going to be walking onto a Wi-Fi network and blah, blah, blah. Now let's turn it around and say, okay, what about a Chromebook? You know, it's if the Chromebook does, and, you know, Karen was talking about the library, if the libraries open up and you can come in and that is just, you know, there's other computers that are on that same Wi-Fi network that are part of the library, it could be an issue. So it's just kind of rolls from there. So we mentioned the fact that this is not designed to be a product pitch at all, but one quick word on our solution. So we talked about from the highest level, what's remote education versus regular education. For remote education, what are some of the challenges we're facing? Then we got into the specifics of how do we make students safe in the district, lower its risk, content filtering on the outgoing side. On the incoming side, we have these device network phishing app attacks that we have to deal with, right? So we talked about what the risks were and how they could impact, including ultimately potentially even delivering ransomware. It's kind of like, what do you do about it? Well, Zimperium is the worldwide leader in what is called mobile threat defense. And that is the active detection on mobile-based operating systems, modern operating systems for device network phishing app attacks. We have one machine learning engine that can detect not only the known attacks, but also the unknown attacks that can occur. And the way that it actually works is, first, we help identify what risks. Is it an out-of-date operating system? Are there apps on here that are known risky? Are you on a risky network? So, and then next is, are you under attack? Is there malware that's actively attacking you? Is there a phishing attack, et cetera? Then we make recommendations for how you remediate or solve it, and we can report it back. Chul had talked about visibility to the districts being a key component on this. We have some fundamental design principles. I think one of the primary one of which is privacy when it comes to this side of things. And scalability and all the rest of those things are critical for us. And so basically the value proposition is similar to content filtering on the outbound side. Zips for Chromebooks actually solves the inbound side or the incoming side. So we are right at the end of the 30 minutes as promised. I'm going to stop and see if there's any additional questions. But in the meantime, Karen, any last words, anything that kind of triggered your thoughts while we were going through that you'd like to cover?
No, I think just to mention one other piece of this very quickly is it, you know, the generations that are coming behind probably the three of us that are on this webinar right now, they view privacy very differently than their parents would, than necessarily a school system would. And so a lot of these devices probably by design or not contain personally identifiable information about our kids, and probably more than even their parents know is out there. And so it's not just about protecting the school division, because that's ultimately, you know, a goal in this as well, but it's also about just being able to protect whatever personally identifiable information that the kids have put on these devices or that are inherent on these devices that need to be protected. So, I mean, this is an area for me that is of particular interest, because I do think it's probably the last piece of the thought process when these devices are being deployed, or any devices are being deployed, quite honestly. And so, you know, it's something that parents need to be paying attention to. It's something that school divisions need to be paying attention to. And, you know, to your point, JT, earlier, and I mentioned it as well, you know, these devices are finding themselves on networks that people don't even realize they're connected to. And so just having the ability to be able to filter and feel safe that, you know, if there is something suspect, it'll fly a flag and give, you know, you the option not to connect. I think that will go a long way to staving off a lot of trouble before it ever hits. And these actors, as you said, they're not shy. They're looking every day. You know, when you consider there are nation states that have warehouses full of people whose sole purpose in life is to break into things and to take control of things that they don't belong in. You know, we've got to come to just final grips with the fact that this is a real problem, and it's not gonna, this whole remote situation is just gonna proliferate it, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that our kids are kept safe. It's been fun to be. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Chul, any last comments?
Yeah, so, I've spent a lot of time working with the public sector, state and local government, education. One thing I love about the government side is that there's a lot of creativity with limited resources. And, and right now it's one of those time periods where, there's just a lot of things happening. But, one of the things that I see from mayor's office is they're pushing for internet access to underserved areas, governor's offices, working with, every state locality education institution to offer, security services in certain respects. Everyone's banding together to figure this out. And, all I would love to do is just talk with each and every one of you that is trying to figure out this, trying to figure out the right plan and, and have us be a part of it and just be creative in how we can help protect those tablets, mobile devices, Chromebooks that are in your environment. And, I want to figure out a way. There's, price I know is always, a challenge in the education system, but, I see a lot of people using CARES funding and looking at E-rate for the future. There's just a lot of opportunity for ways to work together, and that's why I'm here. I want to figure those things out.
That's perfect. And the last thing I'll say as we wrap up, and first of all, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Chul. It's been great as always, chatting with you guys. Thank you for everybody that's been staying online as well. We mentioned that this isn't really a product pitch, and it's not. But I do want to actually give a little bit of a pitch for one of our partners. And that partner is Google. The Google is very serious about protecting education. I've mentioned multiple times here, there's nothing different about a Chromebook as a platform that makes it insecure at all. It's a platform and it's in the hands of Target. Therefore, people are going to go after it. But Google takes this stuff very seriously. They have a full education group all wrapped around the Chromebook side of the world. We also are partners with Google on the Google App Alliance. Our engine scans every app before it goes into the Google Play Store to determine whether or not it's malicious. So we do a lot of stuff with them. So I do want to give our friends at Google props for doing what they can to help protect students as well. So with that, I would like to thank everybody, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you much.
Thanks.
Thank you.